Useless! All of you are useless! Useless! All of you!
Terrified maids scrambled across the luxurious dressing room as shattered glass scattered across the marble floor. A young maid fell to her knees, trembling.
My lady, please. We're still looking for it. Looking for it?
The young woman snapped.
You've had 2 hours! How difficult is it to find one necklace? It was here this morning, my lady.
The young woman grabbed a silver hairbrush and hurled it across the room.
And perhaps one of you stole it!
The room fell silent. Several maids exchanged frightened glances. One older servant stepped forward.
My lady, no one here would ever steal from you.
The Duke's daughter slowly turned toward her.
And who asked for your opinion?
The older servant immediately lowered her eyes. The young woman rolled her eyes dramatically.
Honestly, if incompetence were a profession, every one of you would be rich.
A few maids began quietly crying. Still, nobody dared answer. Everyone on the estate knew better. The Duke's daughter always got her way. Always. Then the doors burst open.
Duke Edmund has arrived!
Announced a footman. The servants immediately looked relieved. Surely the Duke would stop this madness. Surely he would finally correct his daughter. Instead, the powerful aristocrat walked into the room and smiled.
My princess.
Father! These idiots have lost my diamond necklace!
The Duke glanced around the room. Several servants were visibly shaking. One had tears running down her face, yet his attention remained fixed on his daughter.
Is that all?
Is that all? Father, it was my favorite necklace!
The Duke chuckled softly.
My dear, if you cannot find one necklace, I shall buy you 10 more.
The servant stared in disbelief. Instantly, the young woman's anger vanished. She wrapped her arms around him.
Really?
Of course, whatever my daughter wants.
For 22 years, nobody had ever told the Duke's daughter no. Not her father, not her mother, not the servants, not the villagers, not even the nobles who secretly despised her. Everyone feared the Duke's daughter because no one had ever told her no. But life was about to teach her a lesson that wealth, power, and privilege could never protect her from. Before we begin this remarkable story, tell us where you're watching from in the comments. And if you enjoy powerful Duke and Duchess stories filled with drama, romance, life lessons, and unforgettable transformations, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you never miss our next story. Lady Delilah wrapped her arms around her father, her anger disappearing as quickly as it had come.
You're the best father in the world,
She said with a bright smile. Duke Edmund laughed warmly and kissed her forehead.
Of course I am. Now stop worrying about that necklace.
The terrified servants remained frozen where they stood, surrounded by broken perfume bottles, shattered glass, and overturned chairs. None of them dared complain. None of them dared point out that several expensive items had been destroyed during her tantrum. As father and daughter left the dressing room together, the servants quietly began cleaning the mess. Sadly, scenes like this were not unusual. 7 years had passed between Duke Edmund's wedding and the birth of his only child. For 7 long years, he and Duchess Helena had prayed, hoped, and waited for a child to fill the halls of their grand estate. Physicians had come and gone. Relatives had whispered. Friends had offered sympathy. Many had begun to believe the couple would never have children. Then, against expectations, a daughter arrived. The celebration lasted for days. Church bells rang throughout the county. Villagers gathered outside the estate gates. Noble families sent expensive gifts. The Duke ordered enormous feasts prepared. Roasted pheasants, honey-glazed hams, fresh breads, sweet pastries, and imported wines filled tables that stretched through the great hall. The little girl, Delilah, became the center of her parents' world from the moment she opened her eyes. If she cried, someone rushed to comfort her. If she pointed at something, it was given to her. If she wanted a toy, she received 10. If she made a mistake, somebody else was blamed. At first, her behavior seemed harmless. She was only a child. Then she grew older. Instead of learning gratitude, she learned expectation. Instead of learning patience, she learned entitlement. The servants quickly discovered that the easiest way to keep peace was to give her whatever she wanted before she demanded it. By the age of 10, Delilah had become accustomed to ordering people twice her age around the estate. By 16, she had become one of the most feared young women in the county.
At once, miss.
One autumn afternoon, Lady Helena watched from a window as her daughter crossed the gardens. A gardener carrying a basket of roses accidentally stepped into her path. Delilah stopped.
Watch where you're going.
The old gardener immediately bowed. "My apologies, Lady Delilah." The apology should have ended the matter.
You nearly ruined my dress.
The gardener looked confused. He had not touched her. Still, he lowered his head further.
I'm sorry, my lady.
Delilah turned away dramatically.
Perhaps my uncle was right. Some people are simply too old to work.
The old man's face fell. Helena watched the exchange with growing concern. That evening, she raised the matter with her husband.
Edmund, this cannot continue.
The Duke looked up from his dinner. The dining table overflowed with roasted meats, vegetables, fresh fruits, and warm bread. Candlelight reflected from silver dishes and crystal glasses. What cannot continue? Our daughter's behavior.
Not this again.
She humiliated an elderly gardener today.
She was upset.
She is always upset.
Helena, she has a strong personality.
A strong personality is not the same thing as cruelty.
Our daughter is not cruel.
People fear her.
People respect her.
No, Edmund, they fear her.
You worry too much.
Across the table, Delilah casually enjoyed a slice of lemon tart while listening to the conversation. Not once did she appear embarrassed. Not once did she apologize. Instead, she smiled. She already knew how this conversation would end. It always ended the same way. Her father would defend her, and he did. The Duchess fell silent. The Duke returned to his meal. Delilah continued eating dessert. Another complaint had been dismissed. Another lesson had gone untaught. Years passed, and the pattern never changed. Servants trembled when Delilah entered a room. Villagers avoided crossing her path. Even visiting nobles tolerated her insults because nobody wanted conflict with the powerful Duke. Delilah grew beautiful, wealthy, and influential. Unfortunately, she also grew increasingly arrogant. Deep down, she genuinely believed she was better than everyone around her. Nobody had ever told her otherwise. Nobody had ever forced her to face consequences. Nobody had ever told Lady Delilah no. And because of that, she was completely unprepared for the day her entire world would change forever. The day everything changed began like any other. Lady Delilah awoke in silk sheets beneath a carved canopy bed. A maid opened her curtains. Another prepared her bath. A third arranged the expensive gowns she might wear for the day. Nothing seemed different. Nothing warned Delilah that her world was about to collapse. Downstairs, Duke Edmund was preparing to inspect several tenant farms on the estate. Despite his age, he remained active and enjoyed riding across his lands personally rather than relying entirely on reports. Before leaving, he stopped in the breakfast room. Delilah was enjoying fresh pastries covered with strawberry preserves while criticizing the floral arrangements on the table.
The roses are dreadful.
A maid immediately looked terrified.
They were arranged exactly as requested, Lady Delilah. Then my request was apparently misunderstood.
The Duke chuckled. Delilah smiled. Duchess Helena simply lowered her eyes. As always, nobody challenged the young woman. The Duke kissed his wife's hand and then his daughter's forehead before departing. None of them knew it would be the last time they would ever see him alive. Late that afternoon, dark clouds gathered over the countryside. A violent storm rolled across the estate. Rain lashed against rooftops. Thunder shook windows. Several servants rushed through the halls, securing shutters. As the storm intensified, a rider appeared at the main gates. The horse was exhausted. The man riding it looked pale with panic. Within moments, the household was thrown into chaos. Duke Edmund had suffered a massive stroke while returning from the tenant farms. He had collapsed from his horse before reaching home. Despite every effort from physicians summoned from nearby towns, he never regained consciousness. He died during the night. The news spread through the estate like wildfire. Servants cried openly. Villagers gathered outside the gates. Church bells rang throughout the county. For many people, Duke Edmund had been a generous and respected man. The funeral took place several days later. Hundreds attended. Black carriages lined the road leading to the family chapel. Rain fell softly as Duke Edmund's coffin was lowered into the ground. Duchess Helena stood in silence, supported by attendants. For the first time since her marriage, she looked completely lost. Delilah shed tears during the ceremony. She genuinely loved her father, yet even as she mourned, she remained strangely confident. She believed life would continue much as before. After all, she was still Lady Delilah. The estate was still her home. The servants still belonged to the household. Nothing important would change. At least that was what she believed. 3 days after the funeral, Delilah entered the great hall expecting breakfast. The moment she crossed the doorway, she stopped. Someone was sitting in her father's chair. Her uncle, Lord Victor, Duke Edmund's elder brother. Several lawyers stood nearby, holding leather folders and official documents. The atmosphere felt cold, uncomfortable, wrong. Delilah stared at the scene in disbelief.
What is this?
Good morning, Delilah.
Get out of that chair! I said get out!
No.
The single word struck Delilah harder than a slap. For a moment, she simply stared. Nobody had ever spoken to her that way.
Excuse me?
Lord Victor folded his hands.
The estate now belongs to me.
Delilah laughed.
Me.
You must be joking.
I assure you I am not.
My lady, according to the inheritance laws governing this estate, the title and property pass through the male line.
What does that have to do with anything?
Your father had no sons, therefore the legal heir is his elder brother.
Delilah felt her stomach tighten. No!
No!
The transfer is valid.
No!
The estate now belongs to Lord Victor.
No! You can't!
The room became silent. Then came the explosion. No! Delilah's voice echoed through the hall. Lord Victor remained calm. It was your father's home. Delilah stormed toward him. It belongs to me. No, he replied, it does not. Her entire body shook with rage. For years, Delilah had commanded this estate. For years, people had obeyed her without hesitation. Surely someone would stop this madness. She turned toward the servants standing along the walls. You! The footman immediately stiffened. Remove him from this room. Nobody moved. Delilah's eyes widened. Did you not hear me? The old butler slowly stepped forward. For decades he had served her family faithfully. My lady. Finally, the butler looked genuinely sad. We no longer serve you. The words hit Delilah harder than any insult she had ever received. For the first time in her life, Delilah had given a command that nobody obeyed. And for the first time in her life, reality was beginning to show Lady Delilah that the world did not belong to her after all.
Lady Delilah spent the rest of that day convinced that the situation would somehow correct itself. Surely there had been a mistake. Surely one of the lawyers would discover an error in the documents. Surely someone would remember that she was the Duke's daughter. Instead, reality continued moving forward without her permission. The following morning, Lord Victor informed Duchess Helena that they would no longer remain in the main manor. The estate's grand residence now belonged to him. However, he was willing to allow them to stay in a small property located near the northern boundary of the estate. It had once housed a distant relative decades earlier. The building was old. The roof needed repairs. The garden had long since been neglected, yet it was the only accommodation he intended to provide. Delilah was furious. "You cannot be serious." Lord Victor calmly sipped his tea. "I am being more generous than I am required to be. You are throwing us out of our home." "No," he replied, "I am allowing you to remain on my property." The distinction only enraged her further. By the end of the week, the move was complete. Several wagons carried their belongings across the estate. As Delilah stepped out of the carriage and looked at the house that was now her home, she felt physically sick. The structure stood alone near a line of trees overlooking open fields. Its stone walls were stained by age. Paint peeled from several window frames. The front gate leaned slightly to one side. Nothing about it resembled the magnificent manor where she had spent her entire life. The worst part was the view. From the upper floor windows, she could still see the great estate in the distance, the tall towers, the elegant gardens, the sparkling windows reflecting sunlight. Every morning she woke looking directly at the life she had lost. Every evening she watched lights glow from rooms that once belonged to her family. The sight tormented her. The first few days were particularly difficult. On her first morning, Delilah entered the kitchen and frowned. "Where is breakfast?" Duchess Helena looked up from the small wooden table. "There is bread." Delilah stared at the simple loaf. "Where are the eggs?" "There are none." "The sausages?" "We do not have any." "The pastries?" Helena slowly shook her head. Delilah looked horrified. "What am I supposed to eat?" "The bread." For the first time in her life, breakfast consisted of plain bread, butter, and tea. No silver serving trays, no assortment of fresh fruits, no selection of pastries, no servants waiting nearby. Delilah spent the entire meal complaining. The complaints continued throughout the following weeks. The house was too cold, the furniture was uncomfortable, the food was boring, the bedrooms were too small, nothing met her expectations. Whenever she wanted something, she instinctively called for servants. "Mary." No one appeared. "Jane." Silence. "Can someone bring me hot water?" Nothing happened. The absence felt unnatural. More than once, she stood waiting impatiently for assistance that never came. Meanwhile, Helena quietly struggled to maintain their dignity. Money disappeared far more quickly than Delilah realized. The Duchess began selling possessions. At first, it was easy to hide. A decorative vase vanished. An expensive clock disappeared. Several pieces of silverware were quietly taken away. Delilah barely noticed. Her attention remained fixed on her own discomfort. Weeks passed. Then came the jewelry. Helena parted with necklaces she had treasured for years. Elegant bracelets vanished from her dressing table. A collection of rings disappeared one by one. Delilah finally began noticing the changes. "Where is your emerald necklace?" "I sold it." The answer surprised her. "Why?" "We needed the money." Delilah frowned but said nothing. Even then she failed to grasp the seriousness of their situation. As autumn turned toward winter, more possessions disappeared. Paintings once displayed proudly in the manor were sold. Fine dresses were packed away and exchanged for money. Several family heirlooms followed. The house grew emptier with each passing month. One evening, Delilah entered the sitting room and stopped. A cabinet that had belonged to her grandmother was gone. The space it once occupied looked strangely bare. For the first time, unease settled inside her. The losses were becoming impossible to ignore. Yet pride continued blinding her. She still believed her circumstances were temporary. She still believed someone would fix everything. She still believed life would somehow return to normal. Meanwhile, Helena watched their savings shrink and their possessions vanish. Every sale bought them a little more time, nothing more. And while Delilah stared out the window at the magnificent manor that once felt like hers, the reality her mother feared most crept steadily closer. Soon, there would be very little left to sell. One morning, Delilah woke to an unusual silence. For months, her mother had been the first person awake in the small house. Even after losing the estate, Duchess Helena always found something that needed attention.
She managed expenses, planned meals, repaired clothing, and somehow kept their difficult lives from completely falling apart. That morning, however, no sounds came from her room. No footsteps, no movement, nothing. Delilah frowned and knocked lightly on the bedroom door. "Mother?" There was no answer. A strange feeling settled in her stomach. She pushed the door open. Helena was still lying in bed. At first, Delilah thought she was sleeping. Then she noticed how pale she looked. "Mother?" Helena slowly opened her eyes. "I'm awake. You should be downstairs." A weak smile appeared. "I know." Delilah stepped closer. For the first time, she truly looked at her mother. Dark shadows sat beneath her eyes. Her cheeks looked thinner. Even lifting herself into a sitting position appeared difficult. A few hours later, a physician arrived from a nearby village. He examined Helena carefully before asking Delilah to step outside. The old doctor removed his spectacles. "Your mother is exhausted." Delilah folded her arms. "Then give her medicine." The physician shook his head. "Medicine cannot solve everything." "What do you mean?" "She needs rest." Delilah frowned. "Then she can rest for a few days." The physician studied her for a moment. "A few days will not be enough." The seriousness in his voice finally caught her attention. "Will she recover?" "Yes, if she stops carrying burdens that no longer belong on her shoulders." The doctor glanced toward the house. "She has been trying to do the work of several people." After he left, Delilah stood alone outside for a long time. For the first time, a thought entered her mind. If her mother stopped working, who would do everything? The answer became obvious the next morning. Delilah burned breakfast. The bread turned black before she remembered to remove it from the oven. Smoke filled the kitchen. She coughed while opening windows. The meal ended with dry bread, cold butter, and embarrassment. The following day, she attempted soup. It tasted awful. Even she could barely swallow it. By the third day, she was arguing with a pile of laundry. She had never realized how much effort went into keeping clothes clean. Buckets needed carrying, water needed heating, fabric needed scrubbing. The work seemed endless. At one point, she accidentally ruined one of her remaining dresses. She stared at the damaged fabric in disbelief. "I hate this house." The words escaped before she could stop them. From her chair near the fireplace, Helena quietly watched. The Duchess said nothing. Delilah spent the next week battling tasks she had never imagined. Dust seemed to appear everywhere. The floors never stayed clean. Meals required planning. Wood had to be carried inside. Beds needed making. Dishes needed washing. Everything demanded effort. At one point, she found herself kneeling on the floor, scrubbing a stubborn stain. Her back ached, her knees hurt, her hands were sore. After nearly an hour, she sat back in frustration. A memory suddenly surfaced. Years earlier, she had shouted at a maid because a drawing room had not been cleaned quickly enough. At the time, she considered the woman lazy. Now she stared at the floor. The room was still not finished. For the first time, she wondered how servants managed such work every day. The realization unsettled her, not because she had become humble, she had not, but because she was beginning to understand things she had never noticed before. The realization irritated her almost as much as the work itself. One evening, Helena attempted to help prepare dinner. She had barely reached the kitchen before her legs gave way. Delilah caught her before she hit the floor. Fear surged through her. "Mother!" "I'm all right." "No, you're not." Helena tried to reassure her. The effort only made her more frightened. She helped her mother back to bed and sat beside her for hours. That night, she could not sleep. The house felt different, smaller, colder, more vulnerable. Near midnight, she walked into the pantry. The shelves were nearly empty. A few potatoes, some flour, a small container of dried beans, very little else. She stared at the food in silence. No servants would restock those shelves. No steward would manage expenses. No father would solve their problems. No miracle was coming. Only reality remained. For months she had waited for circumstances to improve. For months she expected someone else to fix everything. Now she finally understood. There was nobody left. Only her. The next morning, Delilah stood before a mirror. The young woman staring back looked different. Her hands showed signs of work. Her expensive gowns were gone. Her luxurious life existed only in memory. Yet one thing remained. Her mother still needed her. Delilah took a deep breath. Then she put on her simplest dress, tied back her hair, and walked toward the front door. "Where are you going?" Helena asked softly. Delilah hesitated. The answer still felt strange. "I'm going to find work." For the first time in her life, Lady Delilah stepped beyond the gate, not as a noblewoman giving orders, but as a daughter searching for a way to keep her family alive. The search for work proved far more difficult than Delilah had expected. She left the small house each morning with determination and returned each evening carrying disappointment. At first, she visited merchants in the nearby town. Some listened politely before refusing. Others barely allowed her to finish speaking. A few recognized her immediately.
I cannot help you, my lady.
I am willing to work.
Perhaps you should ask elsewhere.
He remembered me.
The man looked uncomfortable. Perhaps you should ask elsewhere. She knew what he was really saying. He remembered her. People remembered far more than she realized. Word of her behavior had traveled throughout the county long before she lost the estate. The old gardener she had insulted, the servants she had humiliated, the villagers she had dismissed. Those memories had not disappeared simply because her circumstances had changed. Several employers refused her without explanation. Others offered excuses that fooled nobody. After weeks of searching, desperation slowly replaced pride. Food continued disappearing from their pantry. Her mother's health showed little improvement. Each rejection felt heavier than the last. One afternoon, a housekeeper from a large residence several miles away agreed to interview her. The position was not glamorous. It involved cleaning, serving meals, and assisting with household duties. Delilah almost refused. A few months earlier, she would have considered the very idea insulting. Now she needed the work. The following morning, she arrived at the estate before sunrise. The building was smaller than the grand manor she had once called home, but it remained impressive. Rows of trimmed hedges lined the entrance. Stone pathways crossed carefully maintained gardens. Servants moved efficiently through the property, carrying baskets, linens, and supplies. The housekeeper assigned Delilah a plain uniform and a small room shared with 2 other maids. The moment she put on the apron, reality settled heavily upon her shoulders. This was no temporary embarrassment. This was her life now. The work began immediately. Floors required scrubbing, furniture needed dusting, beds had to be made perfectly, silverware demanded polishing until it reflected light like mirrors. The tasks seemed endless. By the end of her first day, every muscle in her body hurt. Yet physical exhaustion proved easier to endure than something else, the way people spoke to her. One morning, while serving tea in a drawing room, Delilah accidentally placed a cup slightly too close to the edge of the table. The lady of the house frowned.
Must everything be done incorrectly?
The criticism stung. Delilah immediately apologized. The woman rolled her eyes. Honestly, standards have become dreadful. The words remained with her long after she left the room. Years earlier, she had spoken to servants in exactly the same manner. At the time, she never considered how humiliating it felt. Now she understood. Another unpleasant lesson arrived through the family's youngest daughter. The young lady was wealthy, fashionable, and accustomed to getting her way. In many respects, she reminded Delilah of herself. One afternoon, the girl tossed a pair of gloves onto the floor. pick those up." Delilah bent down and retrieved them. The young lady barely glanced at her. "You took long enough." A strange feeling settled inside Delilah's chest. The tone, the impatience, the superiority. She had heard those qualities before. She had once spoken them herself. As the weeks passed, similar experiences multiplied. Orders were delivered sharply. Mistakes were noticed immediately. Success often went unrecognized. Several servants worked from dawn until late evening without receiving a single word of appreciation. For years, Delilah had lived among servants while remaining completely blind to their reality. Now she saw everything. She saw aching feet hidden beneath polite smiles. She saw exhausted workers continuing despite illness. She saw young maids fighting back tears after being scolded unfairly. Most importantly, she saw herself. Fragments of her former behavior appeared everywhere. A dismissive comment, a careless insult, an unreasonable demand. Each incident forced her to confront memories she would rather forget. One evening, after a particularly difficult day, Delilah sat alone in the servants' dining room. A young maid quietly joined her. The girl looked upset. Her eyes were red for crying. "What happened?" Delilah asked. The maid lowered her gaze. "I broke a plate." Delilah waited. "I thought they were going to dismiss me." The fear in the girl's voice sounded painfully familiar. Suddenly, Delilah remembered all the times servants had trembled in her presence, all the times people had feared her temper, all the times she had treated human beings as though they existed solely for her convenience. The memory filled her with shame. For the first time, the suffering she had caused for others no longer felt distant. It felt personal. It felt real. And sitting there beside a frightened young maid, wearing the same uniform she once looked down upon, Delilah finally began understanding the pain she had spent years creating for others. The months that followed changed Delilah in ways she never could have imagined. The transformation did not happen overnight. There was no single moment when she suddenly became a different person. Instead, the change came slowly through countless ordinary days. Days filled with work, days filled with responsibility, days filled with lessons she had spent her entire life avoiding. By the time spring arrived, Delilah's hands no longer resembled those of an aristocratic lady. The skin had become rougher. Small scars marked several fingers. Her shoulders had grown stronger from carrying baskets, lifting supplies, and performing tasks she once believed existed solely for servants. The work remained difficult, but she no longer complained constantly. She simply did what needed to be done. Each evening she returned home carrying a portion of her wages. The money was never extravagant, yet every coin mattered. It bought food, medicine, coal, the necessities that kept both her and her mother going. Helena slowly began recovering, not quickly, not completely, but enough to spend more time out of bed. One evening, Delilah arrived home carrying fresh bread, vegetables, and a small piece of meat she had purchased with her earnings. Helena watched quietly as her daughter prepared dinner. The sight almost brought tears to her eyes. Months earlier, Delilah had struggled to boil water. Now she moved confidently through the kitchen. "You've changed," Helena said softly. Delilah paused. For a moment she did not know how to answer. Finally she smiled. "I think life changed me." Helena reached across the table and squeezed her hand. Neither woman said anything else. The moment spoke for itself. Meanwhile, Delilah's reputation among the household staff slowly began changing. When she first arrived, many servants had recognized her. Some remembered stories about the spoiled daughter of Duke Edmund. Others had experienced her behavior personally. Few expected anything good from her. At first, they kept their distance. Over time, however, they began noticing something different. Delilah no longer acted as though she was above them. She completed unpleasant tasks without argument. She helped co-workers when schedules became overwhelming. She treated people with respect, regardless of their position. The change surprised everyone. One afternoon, she visited the village market on her day off.
While purchasing vegetables, she noticed an elderly man standing near one of the stalls. Recognition struck immediately. It was the gardener she had humiliated years earlier, the same man she had mocked because of his age. For a moment, embarrassment flooded her. She considered walking away. Instead, she forced herself forward. The old man looked surprised when she approached. "Lady Delilah." She lowered her eyes. "I owe you an apology." The gardener blinked. Delilah took a deep breath. "I treated you badly." The words felt difficult, necessary, but difficult. "You did not deserve the way I spoke to you." The old man's expression softened. Neither of them mentioned the past again. They spoke briefly before parting ways, yet Delilah walked home feeling strangely lighter. It was the first apology she had ever given sincerely. It would not be the last. At work, another lesson arrived shortly afterward. A new maid joined the household. She was young, nervous, and inexperienced. The girl constantly worried about making mistakes. One morning, she accidentally spilled water while cleaning a corridor. The housekeeper became impatient. Several servants began criticizing her. The poor girl looked moments away from tears. Months earlier, Delilah might have ignored the situation. Years earlier, she might have contributed to it. Instead, she stepped forward. It was an accident. The others turned toward her. Delilah picked up a cloth and began helping clean the mess. "We've all made mistakes." The younger maid stared at her in disbelief. After the others left, the girl quietly thanked her. The fear in her eyes reminded Delilah of herself during her first weeks as a servant. For the first time, she fully understood something important. Kindness cost nothing, yet it could change someone's entire day. From that moment onward, Delilah made a habit of helping newer employees whenever she could. She answered questions, shared advice, offered encouragement. People gradually stopped seeing her as the arrogant daughter of a duke. They began seeing her as someone dependable, someone trustworthy, someone kind. Months passed. The change became impossible to ignore. Servants sought her advice. Co-workers respected her opinions. Even the housekeeper occasionally relied on her judgment. The attention felt different from the fear she once inspired. Fear had created distance. Respect created trust. For most of her life, Delilah had demanded admiration because of her title. Now she was earning genuine appreciation through her actions. The difference was profound. Slowly, almost without realizing it, the woman who had once been feared throughout the county became someone people genuinely enjoyed having around. And for the first time in her life, Delilah discovered that being respected felt far better than being feared. By the second year of her new life, Delilah had settled into a routine she never would have imagined during her days at the estate. She worked hard. She cared for her mother. She saved what money she could. The bitterness that had once dominated her thoughts slowly faded, replaced with a quiet determination to build a future from whatever opportunities remained available to her. One rainy afternoon, she met the man who would unexpectedly change that future. The household had sent several servants into town to collect supplies from local merchants. The market streets were crowded despite the weather. Shopkeepers shouted from beneath covered stalls. The smell of fresh bread drifted from bakeries. Horse-drawn carts rolled through puddles left by the morning rain. As Delilah balanced a basket filled with vegetables and household goods, one of the handles suddenly snapped. Several items spilled onto the muddy road. Before she could react, someone knelt beside her. "I think your basket has surrendered." The unexpected comment caught her off guard. She looked up. A young man with dark hair and kind eyes was already gathering fallen potatoes and onions. Despite the rain, he seemed completely unbothered. Delilah almost laughed. Almost. The old version of herself would have ordered someone else to clean the mess. Instead, she knelt beside him. "Thank you. You're welcome." Together they collected the scattered items. His name was Alexander. He worked nearby, or so he claimed. Their first conversation lasted only a few minutes before they went their separate ways. Delilah assumed she would never see him again. Instead, she encountered him repeatedly during the following weeks. Sometimes at the market, sometimes near the bakery, sometimes while returning home after work. Their conversations gradually grew longer. Alexander possessed an easy manner that put people at ease. He listened more than he spoke. Unlike many people, he never seemed impressed by wealth or status, nor did he appear intimidated by difficult circumstances. One evening they shared a bench overlooking a small river that flowed beyond the village. The water reflected the golden colors of the setting sun. Children played nearby, while fishermen prepared their equipment for the following morning. Alexander tossed a pebble into the water. "You work harder than anyone I know." Delilah smiled. "I wasn't always like this. Nobody is born knowing how to work." She considered explaining who she used to be, the spoiled daughter, the feared aristocrat, the young woman everyone disliked. Instead, she remained silent. For once, she wanted someone to know her as she was now, rather than who she had been. Their friendship continued growing naturally. There were no grand declarations, no dramatic moments, simply two people spending time together, talking, laughing, sharing honest conversations about life. Alexander spoke openly about his hopes for the future. Delilah discussed her concerns about her mother's health. They exchanged stories, ideas, and opinions. Months passed. The friendship became one of the happiest parts of Delilah's life. One afternoon, she arrived at their usual meeting place carrying a small basket. Inside were sandwiches, apples, and pastries she had purchased after receiving her wages. Alexander looked surprised. "You brought all this?" "It isn't much. It looks wonderful." They ate beside the river while discussing everything and nothing. For perhaps the first time in her life, Delilah felt completely comfortable around another person. She never worried about appearances, never worried about status, never tried to impress him. Alexander liked her company regardless. The simplicity felt refreshing. What Delilah did not realize was that Alexander had noticed far more than she understood. He saw how she treated elderly villagers with kindness. He saw her helping younger servants. He saw the patience she showed while caring for her recovering mother. Most importantly, he saw the humility that hardship had taught her. The qualities that impressed him had nothing to do with beauty, family connections, or wealth. They came from her character. Slowly, Alexander found himself falling in love, not with the daughter of a duke, not with an aristocrat, with Delilah, the woman she had become. Yet there was one secret he had not shared. The modest life he presented to the world was not entirely truthful. Alexander was not poor. He was not struggling. In fact, he belonged to one of the most influential aristocratic families in the region. His family's wealth exceeded anything Delilah imagined. For years, he had hidden his true identity whenever possible. Too many women became interested the moment they learned his title. Too many people cared more about his fortune than his character. He wanted something genuine, something real, so he concealed the truth and observed people carefully. What he discovered in Delilah surprised him. Unlike everyone else, she never asked about money, never questioned his social standing, never tried to gain anything from him. She valued him simply because she enjoyed being with him. As spring slowly turned into summer, Alexander became increasingly certain of one thing. The woman he had met beside a broken basket in the marketplace possessed the very qualities he had spent years searching for. The only challenge remaining was finding the courage to reveal who he truly was. Summer arrived carrying changes neither Delilah nor Alexander could avoid forever. For months their friendship had grown steadily stronger. They shared meals, long walks, conversations beside the river, quiet moments that had become increasingly important to both of them. Yet Alexander knew a difficult truth could not remain hidden forever. One afternoon he arrived at the small house where Delilah lived with her mother. A carriage waited nearby, not an ordinary carriage. The vehicle bore an aristocratic crest painted upon its door. 2 uniformed footmen stood beside it. Delilah immediately noticed the difference. Confusion appeared on her face. Alexander looked uncomfortable. "We need to talk."
The seriousness in his voice worried her. Inside the house, Helena quietly excused herself, leaving the pair alone. For several moments, neither spoke. Finally, Alexander took a deep breath. "There is something I should have told you a long time ago." Delilah waited. "My name is not simply Alexander." Her eyebrows furrowed. "What does that mean?" He looked directly into her eyes. "I am Lord Alexander Ashford." Silence filled the room. The name was familiar, very familiar. One of the wealthiest aristocratic families in the region carried that surname. Delilah stared at him. "No, it's true. You lied to me." His expression tightened. "I hid the truth. That is the same thing." Pain flashed across his face. "I wanted someone to know me before knowing my title." Delilah stood and walked toward the window. The revelation stunned her. The modest man she had laughed with, the man she trusted, the man she had fallen in love with. He was wealthy, influential, powerful, everything he had appeared not to be. Several minutes passed before she finally spoke again. "Why me?" Alexander answered honestly. "Because you never cared about any of those things." The words settled heavily between them. Years earlier, she would have chased wealth, admired status, measured people by titles. Now, none of those things mattered as much as they once had. Eventually, she turned toward him. "What matters is whether I know the real man." A small smile appeared on Alexander's face. "You do." Relief washed through the room. The truth had finally been spoken. The following months brought happiness Delilah had never expected to experience again. Alexander formally introduced her to his family. Their relationship continued growing stronger. Meanwhile, Helena's health steadily improved. Proper food, reduced stress, time, all the things she desperately needed finally began helping her recover. One afternoon she sat in the garden, watching Delilah laugh at something Alexander had said. Tears filled her eyes. Not tears of sadness, tears of gratitude. The daughter she once feared losing to arrogance had become someone entirely different. Someone compassionate, someone responsible, someone capable of genuine kindness. The transformation felt nothing short of remarkable. As news of Delilah's relationship spread, people throughout the county reacted with surprise. Many remembered the spoiled young woman she used to be, yet the servants, villagers, and workers who now knew her spoke differently. They described a woman who helped others, a woman who treated people with respect, a woman who had earned admiration instead of demanding it. The change had become impossible to deny. Several weeks before her wedding, Delilah made a decision. There was one place she needed to visit, one chapter of her life that needed closure. She returned to the estate she had once called home. The journey felt strangely familiar. Fields stretched across the countryside, stone walls bordered winding roads. Eventually, the grand manor appeared in the distance. For years, that sight had filled her with pain. For years, she had stared at it from the small house and remembered everything she had lost. Now, the feeling was different. As she walked through the grounds, memories followed her. The gardens, the pathways, the towering windows, the great hall where her world had changed forever. At one time, she would have given anything to reclaim it. Now, she simply observed it. Lord Victor eventually found her standing near the rose garden. For several moments, neither spoke. "You seem happy," he finally said. Delilah smiled. "I am." Her uncle studied her carefully. "You no longer hate me." The statement surprised them both. Delilah looked toward the manor. Then she slowly shook her head. No. The answer was genuine, because she finally understood something she had spent years learning. Losing the estate had not destroyed her life. It had saved it. If she had remained there, she might never have changed, never learned responsibility, never discovered humility, never met Alexander, never become the woman she was now. The transformation filled her with peace. When she left the estate that afternoon, she did not look back. There was no need. The future waiting ahead was far more valuable than the past behind her. In the years that followed, Delilah built a life filled with purpose, love, and gratitude. People respected her not because of wealth, not because of family connections, not because of status. They respected her because of who she was. The frightened servants she once ignored became lessons she never forgot. The hardships she once hated became experiences that shaped her character. And the inheritance she once believed defined her worth was replaced by something far greater: humility, wisdom, love, purpose. In the end, the spoiled daughter who had never heard the word no discovered the greatest truth of all. Sometimes losing everything is the very thing that allows a person to become who they were always meant to be.